The bar is open. I can now take your orders. I mean questions, since caipirinhas are not available.
I'm biting a whole lot more than I can chew in this session, and I just hope this is not too inarticulate and not entirely useless. So I was writing a few notes as you spoke, and I might as well just read from them so as to keep it manageable. Before I do that, I'd like to say my own views, if I can call them such, my intuitions, whatever, are very much in line with what Matthias said and with what Rich Feldman wrote about it a few years ago.
Did you read my reply to Rich?
And ambiguity. I mean, we already need ambiguity, Stu, and I wonder if we need anything remotely close to contextualism if it weren't for the skeptical problem. And you said, well, I mean, ambiguity, that's a lot of baggage, and contextualism is no heavier than that. It may be a whole lot heavier. In any case, that's not my question. I just want to, I think, throw the ingredients of a decent question at you and hope that you will finish the job by making it worth talking about.
I'll pour water in with the whole mix.
Yeah, do that. Okay, now, it seems to me that both the absurdity of asserting, I know that P, but I'm not sure that P, and the acceptability of asserting, I believe that P, but I can't say that I know that P, are very salient to just about every competent agent, at any rate to those who possess all the relevant concepts, belief, knowledge, and certainty. You would say, I suppose, I believe I will be in Amsterdam 5 months from now, but I can say that I know it with only minimal, very minimal reflection if you have all the concepts. I think you wouldn't say anything resembling I know that P, but I'm not sure that P. Now, if this is true, the context variability of these concepts should be remarkably low for the reflective but non-philosophical agents. But this kind of datum seems to be completely absent from the discussion so far as I can see. And I'll try to clarify that point and why it shouldn't be, I think. Peter Klein has tried to provide us with the concept of certainty. Yeah, I know you've heard this story before, but I'll have to say it again because something about it that puzzles me so badly. I mean, why it's being ignored. With a concept of certainty that is supposed to be acceptable to both the epistemist and the skeptic. And I fear that the reason that certainty claims are not taken into account as much as they should, and why the concept of certainty is so clearly absent from most discussion nowadays, is that people seem to have made up their minds very early that certainty is a skeptical, loaded concept. But now, if Peter is right, there is a neutral concept of certainty, something that we should all be able to accept. And I don't know if people haven't been paying attention to that, or if they haven't made up their minds as to whether he's right.
We always ignore Peter. Claudio, it would help if you asked the question, because I'm not sure where you want me to engage.
Yeah, okay, all right. So I'll try to show you that in a second. Assuming that Peter is right, just for the sake of argument, I have argued that to be of any use in philosophy, that concept, the concept of certainty, or his definition of the concept, must be intimately connected to our certainty claims. And the first day, I tried to offer a couple of principles that may account for that connection. But all of this seems to suggest that the consistent and reflective but non-philosophical speaker would be ready to concede that many of his own knowledge claims were false when he's placed in a high standard context. And I remember Rich Feldman writing that the agent would retract his own claims when he is given the chance to reflect on them in a high standard context. He wouldn't, in that context, claim to have once actually known what he now seems doesn't know anymore, or seems incompatible, whatever, with his certainty claims. So I want to know if this makes any trouble for the contextualist. If it gives you pause, I mean, the fact that we do seem to have very clear the distinction between believing and knowing. I believe that Butler is the murderer, but I can't say that I know it. And those seem to coincide with the circumstances in which you wouldn't be ready to claim certainty. That I mean, you certainly, on an intuitive level, you wouldn't claim to be certain that you will be in Amsterdam 5 months from now. With only minimal reflection, you would say, yeah, I believe that I will, but I can't say that I know it.
I mean, I should say, I think Peter's book certainly is a terrific book. I read it and learned a lot from it. No. No, I mean that seriously. It sets up the problem very nicely. And I've read Rich's stuff. All the same, I believe I'm going to lose the lottery, but I don't think I know it. That seems perfectly natural. What do I believe? I mean, it helps. I mean, I think your comment puts pressure on the idea of all or nothing belief. And what's natural is you want to start talking about degrees of belief there. But insofar as we work with an all or nothing concept of belief, I have no problem with saying I believe I'm going to lose. Well, why'd you buy the ticket? Well, I don't know I'm going to lose. So I don't see a tension there.
Just about any competent speaker would readily concede that he doesn't know when he cannot claim to be certain is an important datum here and seems to be ignored.
I see. Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, there is this usage in English anyway, and there's a question about whether it's colloquial or not. But you might say, well, I don't know it. I know it, but not for certain. People have different intuitions on that. Sometimes people will back off if you give them brain into that scenario and say, well, I know I have hands, but I guess I don't know it for certain. Certain is a hard word. I think you could duplicate some of these paradoxes with certainty. You know, are you certain your car is parked in the garage? Yeah, I mean, I just left it there. Do you know it hasn't been stolen? Are you certain it hasn't been stolen? Well, maybe not. But well, right. But the view is, sure. Then the view would be, once you start thinking about the possibility your car has been stolen, you withdraw the claim that you're certain it's there. But then if certain is context sensitive in the way nose is, that's all explainable.
All right. I have Feldman, Juan, and Pino.
I just want to say that I think Peter's book is terrific, too.
I think we should all stop now and go read Peter's book.
You should. I just wanted to ask a question that combines the point about blindness to the content of your own thoughts, or the meanings of your own thoughts, and what Matthias talked about with respect to upward pressure and schism. So you seem to want to say that one of the things that can determine, I guess, the content of your utterances is what the speaker's thoughts. That is, so schism could sort of resist the upward pressure on the standards for knowledge. But of course, if the blindness extends inside, then he might have been unaware of what it was he was thinking too. And so I'm wondering how it was that his thinking manages to keep the standards down, given that maybe he was blind to the change in the content of his own thought. I mean, his thinking, no, I really do know.
So, if I understand you think there's some tension between the view that the semantic blindness thesis, or the thought blindness thesis, and the view that speakers or thinkers can resist the upward pressure. But, I mean, the claim would just be that when you resist the upward pressure, that you're not aware that that's what you're doing. So when someone says, let's talk about the uncontroversial case, flatness, and you think, you want to do it in thought, is that important rather than language? Okay, so I look through the microscope, I think this is a flat table, I look through the microscope, I see the peaks and valleys on the surface, and it doesn't incline me in any way to think that the table isn't flat. Now I suppose, so maybe it's wrong to say maybe there's just no pressure. The pressure works better in a conversational situation where everybody else is thinking. I mean, in the conversational situation, what you'd say is, so suppose we're a group, we're talking about flatness, skepticism, it's really not the right word, skepticism, but you know what I mean. Suppose we're all in the audience and the teacher is talking and says, physics has discovered that nothing is flat, and starts showing slides of what the table looks like under a microscope, and everybody goes, oh, wow, amazing. These things aren't flat. And then I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, I don't get this. It still seems flat to me. There, I think a natural way to describe it is I'm resisting, or maybe not feeling, I don't think it's too important how we put it, the upward pressure that everyone else is. And then in the case of thought, if I'm just thinking about it, it would just be a case where I don't feel the upward pressure. And then I guess when I say that you're resisting the upward pressure, it's kind of a statistical claim that you're not feeling what most people feel.
But when you're sitting there, when you're resisting,
that might not be the right word. It might be there's nothing to resist. You're just not feeling the pressure.
What does the word flat mean in your thoughts?
It means flat by low standards.
So I guess I'll stop after this. It's just sometimes I guess really in the end this question is about what the contextualist thesis is about what determines the content of the words or the thought, because sometimes it seems to be a lot of weight is put on the conversational context and what other people are doing.
Right.
And then sometimes it seems to be it's whatever the speaker has in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering how
okay,
that
good.
work out.
So in a conversation, there's this issue. Suppose here's the slide. You see, the micro picture of the surface. And everybody starts saying, wow, that table isn't flat. And then I say, I'm not moved by it. I say, what do you mean that table's flat? Question, do I succeed in saying something true? Well, I think that's a hard question. What is the content of my utterance in that context? I mean, David Lewis discusses these kinds of cases where he talks about what's happened previously in a conversation sets the score in such a way that it can override speaker intention. So he uses the Austin Francis a hexagon case. So suppose we're looking at a map of Europe, and I say France is hexagonal. And all of you say, not really. I mean, look at the way Normandy sticks out and, it kind of curves by the Côte d'Azur. And I go, oh, yeah. Then I look over at, all right, first suppose you all accepted it. I said France is hexagonal. You say, right, I said something true. Then I say it, in the second scenario, we all agree it really isn't hexagonal. Look at Normandy. Now, suppose I look at, then after we've all agreed France isn't hexagonal, I look at Italy and say, Italy is boot-shaped, and I have a private intention to be lowering the standards for precision. Do I succeed in saying something true? Lewis says, I say something false, because the conversational score has been set by what we agreed upon by when we said that France isn't hexagonal. The standards for precision were set. and I can't override that with a private intention. So there's these kinds of dynamics that take place in conversations with speakers and listeners. Now, what about when you're thinking? I think the most useful way to think of it is it's a sort of conversation with yourself. And if you're the only one involved, then your intentions set the score, so to speak. So if you look at that slide by yourself and you have no inclination to think that the table isn't flat, and you think the table is flat, I think your thought is true. Does that address your question?
Juan. It seems to me that contextualism treats alike two kinds of cases that should be treated differently. So the first kind of case is the lottery paradox. So we feel the pressure, even before we are contextualists, we feel the pressure.
Even before what?
We are contextualists. Even if we don't buy contextualism, we feel the pressure to bring in line the two incompatible claims. The claim that we do not know that we're going to lose the lottery with the claim that we know that we're not going to be billionaires.
Yeah.
We feel the pressure. Contextualism explains why we feel the pressure. But contextualism predicts that we should feel the same kind of pressure in a case where the contents of the propositions are not related, are logically independent. So take the case where I say, I think about lotteries and I realize I don't know I'm going to lose the lottery, but I also am thinking about, parts of my body, and I say, well, but at least I know that I have hands. Contextualism has the prediction that we should feel the same kind of pressure there to bring them back in line.
I don't know that that's, let's talk about, people do it differently, but in my view, it's the salience of error possibilities that puts pressure on the standards. By an error possibility, I mean an error possibility is a possibility incompatible with what I believe, but compatible with my evidence. So why do we want to say, why do we feel such a strong pressure towards saying we don't know we're going to win the lottery? Well, lottery, by its very nature, is the sort of thing where error possibilities are salient. That's what a lottery is. You're taking a chance. There's a chance you're wrong. But there's a chance you're going to win. That's the whole point of the lottery, right? So, do you know you're going to lose? It's just hard to think about a lottery without thinking about an error possibility, without that being salient. Now, if we switch to, I know I have a hand, there's no salient error possibility there. Now, you could introduce one. You could say, well, maybe you're a brain in a vat. And now an error possibility is salient, and we begin to wonder whether we know we have a hand. But so I guess my answer to your question is, in the cases where the propositions are logically unrelated, we could have an explanation for, I don't think that doubt about whether we know the one will translate into doubts about whether we know the other. But so in effect, there would be a context shift when we go from thinking about whether we know the one to whether we know the other.
I was trying to stipulate that there is no context shift. So I'm talking about lotteries.
If there were no
context, you can stipulate that there is. So we're thinking about very, very hard about lotteries. That elevates the standards. Right? That raises the standards. And so, yeah, it's true. We don't know that we're going to lose the lotteries. But look, here's something that we do know.
Let's use a case.
Keep in mind the lottery, but here's something that we do know.
Let's get away from Cartesian skepticism. Let's say, but I know my car is parked. Okay, interesting question. So here's your point, if I've got it right. Maybe what happens is, I don't know I'm going to lose the lottery. We agree. I'm going to win the lottery, sorry. Anytime I say lose, translate that to win. Oh, when it makes the sentence true.
You want to win.
And then, okay, so here's your question. Here's your point. Now the standards have been set high. Then I say, I know my car is parked in the garage. Why not, you're saying, why shouldn't the contextualist say this? I've unknowingly said something false because the standards were already set high by the claim I made about the lottery. And I don't realize, by that very standard, I don't know my car is parked in the garage. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure what to say. I mean, that would be one thing you could say. You said something false, The other possibility is that the standard shifts, the context shifts when you get away from the one to talking about the other. But interesting point. Have I addressed it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, seems to me that the underlying factor here is that contextualism pays only lip service to the role of closure in generating the pressure. But
I'm not sure I see that because when the propositions are logically related, then it's very hard for what you say about the one not to affect what you say about the other. That is, the error possibility for one is the error possibility for the other. The possibility that my car has been stolen is, of course, an error possibility for my claim that it hasn't been stolen, and it's an error possibility for my claim that it's parked in the garage.
But I'm saying that's the only case when we're going to feel the pressure. And contextualism has the prediction that whenever you set the standards high, you're going to feel...
Well, I don't know that it has that prediction, because I think you could, as I was saying, I don't see any reason why a contextualist couldn't say, if the standards get set high, but then we start talking about a proposition, we make a knowledge description that's false relative to those high standards, but the error possibility isn't salient for that particular knowledge description, there might be a shift to a lower standards context.
Let's move on. Plinio. And then I have Faria, Marco de Paul, Ram, and Richard Farmerton.
So we're going to go to 1240, is that right?
Yes.
I want to know how brief to make my answer.
Okay, I'd like to raise a question. I don't know if I understood very well what you said. But the first thing is that, you know, what you call a paradox or a puzzle, I think it may seem a paradox or a puzzle to many philosophers. I don't think it would look like a puzzle for most people. I'm inclined to call that a misunderstanding instead of a paradox and a puzzle. And this seems to me that if you understand it as a misunderstanding, it favors a contextualist position. In this sense, that you have a paradox if you presuppose already a certain conception of knowledge, and if you are using deductive closure, presupposing this conception of knowledge. And if we are in an ordinary talk, and someone says, well, I know where my car is, it's on that street, and then someone comes and says to me that, well, you don't know it, it may have been stolen. Well, then I think that it's a misunderstanding here, it's not a paradox. Because when I said, I know where my car is, it's on that street, it means I parked over there and not on the other side. I mean, the contrast here is between this street and that street or in my garage. It's not the contrast of being still there or being stolen. So that's, so I think I would call it a misunderstanding. What we need is not especially a theory about knowledge, but just rephrasing what we said before to avoid this misunderstanding. So that's the first point.
Might I address that one while it's fresh in my mind?
Yeah, well, because the second is connected. It's not exactly a second point. But what is at stake here is contrast shifts, what you are calling low or high standards. I think it's better if we talk about different contrasts. My question would be, that's I didn't understand. Your idea is that the meaning of the word knows or the knowledge changes in different contexts, or
meaning in the sense of content, not character, right? To use the distinction.
Or the meaning is the same one, just the contrast changes. I mean, it's not that we have low or high, it's just that the contrast has changed, but the meaning of the word knowledge or as knows is still the same.
Okay. Well, you know, the whole point of indexicality is there's two senses of meaning, character and content. Now, the point you make about contrast, I mean, this is a view that Jonathan Schaffer has been putting forward, I think, pretty effectively. And it's a kind of contextualism. It's just the view that the way the meaning in the sense of content shifts is that the context selects the contrast class. So that's another way you could go. so I think contrastivism is a form of contextualism. I think Jonathan concedes that. Whether that's the right way to do it, I mean, he gives these very elegant papers that I'm always impressed by. I haven't thought about it. I don't know yet. As to the first point, whether this is a paradox or a misunderstanding, I say it's a paradox just in, here's what I mean when I say it's a paradox. You've got a set of propositions that are, it's an inconsistent set. They can't all be true, but each one looks intuitively quite plausible. Now, of course, unless we have what Schiffer calls something that can only have an unhappy face solution, I think, is how he puts it. So the paradox is irresolvable. Unless that's the case, then paradoxes will involve a misunderstanding, because in the end you want to say there's only the appearance of inconsistency, or you want to say there's only the appearance that all three propositions are true. One of them is really false. So paradoxes, aside from the ones that take only unhappy face solutions, unless there's some inconsistency in our concept, as Schiffer says sometimes, every paradox will involve a misunderstanding.
Paul.
Now this is really a side issue, calling for a brief and as dismissive as you feel like answer. I was just wondering whether given David's claim that since the paradox is equally troubling,
I'm sorry.
Since the paradox is equally troubling when it is not expressed at all, when it is not expressed at all, but merely thought, the contextualist has to claim that the relevant context sensitivity affects thought as well. I was just wondering whether, according to you, a response along the lines of some version of externalism about thought content would be of any help, or rather it would screw it all for good.
Well, I mean, doesn't Putnam say the twin earth thing shows that our thoughts are indexical? I mean, isn't that?
Yeah. That's what I meant.
Yeah, so, sure, that's helpful to me, I think.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Michael DePaul.
Deciding the issue between your view and Matthias's view. And it seems to me one thing you said suggests this: if there really are indefinitely many different standards, then your side would be preferable. But if it turns out that there are relatively few standards, then it seems a view like Matthias's might be more preferable. And you simply asserted there were indefinitely many. I mean, in the paradigm cases, things like I, we know there are indefinitely many people who could say I, or especially here, there are certainly indefinitely many spatial locations. It's not clear to me that there are, why we should think there are indefinitely many, or say continuously varying standards, rather than, usually in the discussion, there only two are mentioned, high and low. And
yeah, that's what Hawthorne calls the toy theory.
So it seems that, but, it's just not clear to me that there are all that many. Another thing that would seem to me it might be worth thinking about is this. On your kind of view, it's something like automatic, the sensitivity to context. I take it it's something like a mechanism, part of our psychological equipment, that we are keyed into that, and we kind of automatically...
It's part of what it is to be a competent speaker.
Yeah, and so it would be, I think, automatic. But if we can, say, pick out a certain, to shift now to Matthias's way of speaking, focus our attention, single out one of these, and really stick and say, let's just talk about Cartesian knowledge for the next hour. And then it looks like it's not automatic, but something that we can disambiguate and focus on and stick with this and talk about it. And that would seem to be a consideration that might favor Matthias's kind of view. And then the last thing, I wonder if you're not being a bit too easy. I mean, where you are now, if you think back to Lewis's original presentation, it sounded like...
You mean scorekeeping in the language game?
Yeah. It sounded like the context was fairly fixed, and it was a bit molasses-like. I mean, especially the idea that the standards can get pushed higher and higher, and then they kind of only will ooze back to a lower context. And, I mean, now it seems like you've got the context capable of switching back. I mean, I can start speaking a sentence, and I know we could come up with examples where it's going to be, I'm going to be flipping context within the course of a single sentence, back and forth, and other people sitting talking with me are going to be in different contexts, and then there's going to be the Chisholm there who kind of resolutely carries around his own context like a shell, you know. It's starting to look kind of bizarre, and I mean, you can go that way, but I think you really should admit that this is, that there's a serious cost to getting the context, so getting this view, accepting this view of context.
Okay, thanks. I mean, lots of good points. I'll try to address all of them. I'll work in reverse order, which probably means there's no hope I'll remember the first one, but at least I'll remember one of them. About the Lewis point, I mean, Lewis is notorious for saying that once the standards go up, they can't come back down. And as far as I know, almost nobody agrees with him on that. And so he has this rule of attention, right? And it's just a strict, non-defeasible rule. Once you just mention the standards have to go up and they can't come back down. Just mention a skeptical possibility. And everybody said, so, okay, we might be brains in a vat. None of you knows anything now, right? And everybody criticized Lewis for that. So I think Lewis is just wrong about how that works.
I didn't mean to defend you.
Oh.
That's
Microphone.
his view is naturally the starting point, right?
Yeah.
And so, of course, that's wrong. They've got to be more flexible than that. What I'm trying to say is, I mean, you're getting, I think now, quite extreme where they're, okay, it's not like that, certainly, but now, they're, as I said, I can start talking, and in seconds, the context is going to be flipping around. And
and then there's...
Now it gets to be not so useful an idea.
Well,
context.
I mean, it's true. It can shift around.
Slippery.
It can remain fixed, as in the case of Chisholm. But... but, look, if you want to raise an objection to nose being construed as context sensitive, the objection better not apply to flat being construed as context sensitive. And we can shift around. I'm not claiming anything for nose that doesn't occur with flat as well. You can talk, a group of Coloradans are talking, they say the road is flat, the Kansas people will say it isn't, and they say, okay, all right, it's flat, but it's not flat. You can do all these alleged problems you raise for the claim that nose is context sensitive would be problems for the claim that flat is context sensitive. This table is flat, and then look under the microscope and say, oh, but it's not flat. So this is no special problem for the claim that ascriptions of knowledge are context sensitive. It's just a feature of natural language that there are these terms that are context sensitive, and sometimes it's easy to shift back and forth. Sometimes, if you don't have uncooperative audience, you can't shift. Sometimes you have speakers and listeners who are intending different standards, and it's unclear that any clear proposition is being expressed. So I don't think this is a problem for the claim that nose is context sensitive. Your point about how many standards, it's a good point. And I was sort of facile about that. By the way, if there's only two standards and ambiguity is the right way to go, I'm happy to go that way. You get the same resolution of the paradox, and I don't think it's that different in spirit. But I see no reason in principle why there couldn't be different communities. Some are more cautious than others. They encounter different practical situations. And do we want to say they're speaking a different language, because they're, or because their standards vary. It seems to me more natural to say that, no, it's the same, they mean, in the relevant sense, the same thing by no we do, they just have different standards. So in principle, I don't see why there couldn't be. How many there actually are in English as it's spoken now, you know, we can let the linguists do their Google searches. I don't know.
Rum. Richard Palmerton. We have 5 more minutes.
I'll make it really quick. So, although it is a kind of basic question, you refer to these things as indexical. There's a notion of an incomplete sentence. It seems to me to be a useful notion. So if you say that something's probable and you're a relative probability person, you say, well, it doesn't really mean anything by itself. You got to flesh it out. And tall just seems to me obviously like that, and it really doesn't take much time to convince people it's like that. They clue in pretty quickly. It's just an incomplete sentence. And if you're thinking that way, instead of talking about the meaning of that sentence shifting from context to context, you'd say it doesn't have any meaning till you fill in the rest of the sentence. Now you can say, well, but that's determined by context sometimes, although the reason I like Matthias's view is that you feel like screaming at people sometimes. Stop making us guess, just complete the damn sentence and tell us what you want to assert. And then we've got nice, definite truth conditions for the completed sentence that don't vary by context at all.
Yeah, but the problem with that view is most of us walk around saying sentences that are neither true nor false, on your view.
Yeah, well, but that's, we say, we abbreviate in all sorts of ways.
But we seem to understand each other. I mean, if you say to me...
sometimes, but if you're sitting in that car listening to people go back and forth with flat, you'd feel like screaming at them after a while. For God's sake, talk about flat for Kansas roads, okay? You get it? Mm-hmm. And the other person would say, well, it's not flat for a Colorado road. And you go, yeah, okay.
Well, what about ambiguous sentences? If I say, I went to the bank, if I just say, oh, I went to the bank this morning, did I say something either true or false?
Look, I've got the view, this is what I think probably David has, that it's the thought expressed by the sentence.
Okay, so is the thought expressed by the sentence true or false?
Yeah.
Okay. Then you just say the sentence is neither true nor false because it didn't clearly express one thought rather than the other?
You say of that sentence type.
The sentence type, yeah.
It's neither true nor false as sentence type, given its use in a certain context by a speaker and the thought that it expresses, then it has a truth value. But maybe this is all just terminological.
Well, I think that the epistemological, there are philosophy of language issues here. I think they don't matter for the epistemology. You could reconstruct everything I said on your model. You know, the skeptics are filling in the sentence differently than we're filling in the sentence. And you could have the same resolution of the paradox. So this is an issue, I think, independent of the epistemological issues. An interesting issue, and I'm not all that wedded to one particular way of doing it. I mean, I prefer my way of doing it, but you could probably convince me that I should do it your way. Right, right. No.
Probability is...
No, there might be some reasons for thinking... I think you need to read Peter's book, Richard, and all of this will be clear to you. So I guess what I'm saying is you may be right about that, but I don't think it affects the epistemological issues.
Okay. Thank Professor Cohen, thank Matthias, David, and Reason. Let's have a lunch.